Hello, hi, how are you? And welcome to another podcast by George. Well, the presidential campaign season is well underway with the Iowa caucuses little more than a year away. There's a number of announced candidates out there, particularly on the Democratic side, and none more compelling, none more interesting than Tulsi Gabbard. And I'm going to read a little bit of her biography here, and then we're going to listen to her stump speech as she appears in Des Moines, Meeting Des Moines it's called, and podcast by George was there. Was in the press gaggle, as they call it, had an opportunity to ask a question or two after her statement. It's very interesting indeed. I really like this particular candidate. Tulsi Gabbard is a very interesting potential presidential nominee. Now, Tulsi Gabbard spent her life growing up in beautiful Hawaii. As a teenager, she co-founded an environmental nonprofit called Healthy Hawaii Coalition, focusing on educating children about protecting Hawaii's environment. As an advocate for environmental policy, Tulsi was elected to the Hawaii State Legislature in 2002 when she was just 21 years old, becoming the youngest person ever elected in the state. A year later, she joined the Hawaii Army National Guard to serve Hawaii and our country. And in 2004, Tulsi volunteered to deploy with her fellow soldiers, becoming the first state official to voluntarily step down from public office to serve in a war zone. Now, Tulsi served 2 tours of duty in the Middle East, and she continues her service as a major in the Army National Guard. Tulsi's 2005 deployment was a 12-month tour at Logistical Support Area Anaconda in Iraq, where she served in a field medical unit as a specialist with a 29th Support Battalion Medical Company. She was awarded the Meritorious Service Medal at the end of that tour. Now, in between her 2 tours, Tulsi served in the U.S. Senate as a legislative aide and continued to work in the Senate till 2009, when she again voluntarily deployed her unit to the Middle East. During her second deployment, in addition to leading her platoon on a wide variety of security missions, she also conducted non-military host nation visits and served as a primary trainer for the Kuwait National Guard. Tulsi was one of the first women to set foot inside a Kuwait military facility and became the first woman to ever be awarded and honored by the Kuwait National Guard for her work in their training and readiness program. In 2010, Tulsi was elected to the Honolulu City Council, serving as chair of the Safety, Economic Development, and Government Affairs Committee and vice chair of the Budget Committee. In 2011, she visited Indonesia as part of a peacekeeping training with the Indonesian Army. Tulsi was elected in 2012 to the United States House of Representatives, serving Hawaii's 2nd District. She is one of the first 2 female combat veterans to ever serve in the U.S. Congress, and also its first Hindu member. And I don't know, some people are making a big deal about that, but my God, that takes me back to my childhood with everybody making a big deal about John Kennedy being a Catholic, which was a complete non-factor, non-issue in his presidency as far as anybody's been able to determine. But yeah, okay, so she's a Hindu. Now in her 4th term in Congress, 4 terms already, Tulsi brings with her a broad range of real-world experience, a storehouse of personal strength and tested leadership as she represents the people of Hawaii and our nation in Congress. Well, we're going to get to her press event in Des Moines, and right off the top, I want to tell you that she's a very impressive individual, supremely confident, extremely well-spoken. And if you get an opportunity to get out and hear what she has to say, I would recommend that you do it. The other reason that I'm, of course, and I've mentioned this in an earlier podcast, the other reason, of course, that I'm a big Tulsi Gabbard fan, I'm a big fan of Hawaii. My wife and I visited the state. What a beautiful place that is. Love Hawaii. And if you remember in my 2018 wrap-up podcast, I mentioned the fact that I thought one of the most significant news stories of the year was that false missile alert, that nuclear alert in Hawaii that was a false alert, thank God. But to me, it's unprecedented. It's never happened before in the history of the planet where people actually thought and were told that it was not a drill, that there were inbound missiles coming, and that they should, seek shelter, whatever they might be able to do. Well, here's the thing about that. It took 45 minutes for the state government in Hawaii to sound the all clear, let everybody know that it was a mistake, that it was an error. But 20 minutes into that drill, there was one person that took the initiative to let everybody know that it was a false alarm. It was an elected representative. Guess who that person was? It was, of course, Tulsi Gabbard. So let's pick up this presentation here in Des Moines right after she wishes everyone aloha, and she begins her presentation with a little bit of a warning, and this isn't a false alarm. This is Tulsi Gabbard.
We're gathered here because our country is being torn apart. It is so disheartening to see how far we have come from the vision that our founding fathers had for us. That vision that laid out a government of, by, and for the people. Do you feel that this government is of, by, and for the people?
Absolutely not.
It's not. It's not. That's the truth. Instead, we have powerful, self-serving politicians in Washington who are driving wedges between us as people, trying to weaponize different issues and different things that make us unique as people for their own political gain. We have some in the media who try to capitalize off of division and further deepen those divides to drive up ratings. The corporate special interests who are lining their pockets on the backs of the American people. All of this further worsening the situation that we are in, the state of our nation today. We have the opportunity to lead the charge, to choose to heal those wounds, to heal those divides. And the reason I always start with aloha is because of what aloha really means. Aloha is so much more than hello and goodbye. Aloha reminds us that we are all connected. We are all family, that we are all God's children. Regardless of the color of our skin, who we worship, where we come from, how much money we make, what kind of education we got. All of these things that are being used to divide us as people. Aloha inspires us to overcome those divides and to come together around that common spirit, those common goals and aspirations that we have. Those goals that were outlined in the vision that our founders had for us of freedom, of equality, of opportunity for every single one of us. And so we know what the problem is, now we know what the solution is, and the choice is ours to stand together, to stand united in that spirit of aloha, that spirit of service above self, that brings us together and that gives us the power to overcome the obstacles that stand before us. And we know those obstacles are great. We know that they are powered by a lot of money, a lot of power, and long-standing investment in the status quo. But we also know that throughout history, time and time again, it has proven the only thing that has the power to overcome those forces of darkness and selfishness and greed is the power of the people. It is the power of our voices, standing united. Standing united to overcome that corruption of spirit that casts a dark shadow over us. Standing united to bring about real change like Medicare for all. To make sure that every single person in this country gets the care that we need. Standing united to bring about real change to our broken immigration system. To bring about real change to fix and reform our broken criminal justice system. Standing united to bring about the real change we need to make sure that every one of us has clean water to drink, that every one of us has clean air to breathe, that we are protecting our soil and our planet that is sustaining us and feeding us, making sure that we have a future, making sure that our children and their children have a future. Not only a future, but a future that is brighter and better than the one that stands before us today. There are so many urgent needs that we have in our families, and in our communities, in our states right now. How do we address those needs?
Well, I don't know about you, but I agree with just about everything she said so far. As a matter of fact, I think with everything that she said so far. But that's an interesting question. How do we address these needs? How do we answer this dilemma of our times? The answer is obvious. It's right in front of us, but we've been so conditioned by the powers that be that we can't see the hand in front of our face. And here's Tulsi Gabbard to reveal the answer.
There's an issue that's central to all of this, and that is the issue of regime change wars, the cost of these wars, this new Cold War with heightening tensions between the United States and Russia and China, and the fact that because of this, we stand on the brink of nuclear catastrophe. We are at a greater threat of nuclear catastrophe now than we ever have been before. This is a threat to our very future, and if we allow this to continue, the trillions of dollars that we spend on these wars, on regime change wars, on this new Cold War, on this nuclear arms race, every one of those dollars are coming out of our pockets. And every one of those dollars are not going to take care of and pay for Medicare for all. They are not going to invest in our infrastructure, in our roads and bridges, in our water systems. Those dollars are not going to pay for quality education for everyone. They're not going to pay for our teachers, for special education, for our schools. So this is why I talk about this issue. And sometimes people will say, Tulsi, why do you talk about war and the cost of war when there is so much that's happening right here in our own backyard that must be addressed? The reason is because unless we end these regime change wars, we work to end this new Cold War and this nuclear arms race, we will not have the resources we need to address and to serve the needs of our families and our people here at home. It is we as veterans who know most the cost of war and are thus committed to fighting for peace. This is why we understand the cost of war that is paid for by our veterans, that is paid for by our brothers and sisters who don't make that trip home, who pay the ultimate price in service to our country. Those who do come home with wounds that are both visible and invisible, paying that price for years to come. But we also know that it is every single one of us in this room. It is every single American who pays the price for these wars. Those dollars are coming out of our pockets when they need to be invested in taking care of our people here at home. This is why this issue is so central to everything else. This is why it's important for us to take action, to make this change. As we work to bend the arc of history away from war and towards peace, it will require every one of us standing united against those forces that are so invested in us remaining in a state of perpetual war.
Now you can see why this is so compelling to somebody like me. This is right out of the 1960s and 70s playbook, folks. But this is exactly the issue, exactly the problem confronting this nation for years, for decades, almost for centuries. And Tulsi Gabbard has got her finger on it, and it's very moving for people like me that are in the audience. And this is somebody that's active military, somebody that's being awarded for valor in a field of combat, talking about these issues. This isn't somebody that dodged the draft. This isn't somebody suffering from bone spurs. This is somebody that's currently serving our country in a meritorious capacity, Tulsi Gabbard.
This place where we stand today is dark. This threat is real. There are more nuclear weapons in the world today with enough power to destroy our entire planet. Now, a few things have happened recently that have exacerbated this crisis that we're facing that I want to talk about briefly. A few weeks ago, President Trump pulled out from the INF treaty with Russia that was negotiated over 3 decades ago between Reagan and Gorbachev. And at that time, because of that historic treaty, one that they recognized was within the mutual interests of both of our countries and in the interests of peace in the world, they brokered this historic deal that reduced the number of nuclear weapons in the world by almost 75%, making us more safe. By pulling out from this treaty, rather than doing the courageous work necessary to strengthen it, to expand it, to try to bring other countries into the fold, President Trump has chosen to walk away, sparking off this new arms race as a result. Now, if you look in the news in the last few days, there are a lot of tough talk and a lot of threats being made, specifically about this new arms race that is going to cost us so much money and is going to make us and the world less safe. Now, we can also look to what's happening in North Korea and the nuclear threat coming from North Korea. This is something that is real for every one of us. It's very real for us in Hawaii, where a little over a year ago in January of last year, every cell phone in Hawaii got a message that said, "Missile incoming. Seek shelter immediately. This is not a drill." Seek shelter immediately. This is not a drill. So as these messages were going out, we're thinking that there are just minutes to live. Where do we go? Where do we find shelter? How many nuclear bunkers are here in Des Moines? Right? Same thing we were thinking. No idea. Where do we go? Where is there shelter to protect you from a nuclear missile incoming? There isn't. Exactly. And that's what our families, that's what our residents found out very quickly. As a father who was lowering his little girl down a manhole to try to keep her safe. We had others who were getting in the car and driving to the mountains to try to see if there was a cave somewhere that they could find shelter for themselves and their children. Just imagine what you would do if we all got that message here today. But this is the reality. This is the seriousness of the threat that we're facing, not just in Hawaii, but right here in Des Moines today. Every single community, every single one of us, this is the fact, this is the reality that we're dealing with. So in a few days, President Trump is going to be meeting with Kim Jong-un in Vietnam to try to negotiate a deal to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula, something that needs to happen, a meeting that I support that will, hopefully, if successful, bring us towards a place of peace and security and safety. But the problem is, and this is again why I'm talking about these issues as they're linked, these regime change wars have a cost and consequence that goes beyond the price that's paid for by our veterans, the price that's paid by the people in the countries where we wage these wars, the price that's paid by every one of us, and the dollars that's not going to our communities here at home. Because of these regime change wars, it is far less likely that Trump will be successful in making this negotiation to get North Korea to get rid of their nuclear weapons because of history. And it has been said time and time again that back in 2011, after the United States talked with Gaddafi in Libya and said, okay, we're not going to come after you and try to topple you as long as you give up your nuclear weapons program. He agreed, gave up his nuclear weapons program, and in 2011, the United States went in and overthrew Gaddafi, throwing that country into chaos, strengthening terrorist groups there, creating a failed nation, increasing the suffering of the Libyan people, to a point where now today there are women and children being sold as slaves in open markets. And so Kim Jong-un in North Korea now is saying, why would I believe the promise of the President of the United States saying, if I get rid of nuclear weapons, which exist as a deterrent against regime change, that you won't come in and topple me just like you did Gaddafi? This is the cost of these regime change wars and how they are making us less safe and the world more dangerous.
Okay, so I want to jump in here for a second. You know, I was not the most astute observer of the Middle East crises back in 2011, but I did not know that. Did you? That we told, the United States that is, told Libya's leader, Muammar Gaddafi, that if he gave up his nuclear weapons program, we would not pursue him and implement regime change. Well, okay, I don't know if you remember or not, but I do. The last video that I saw of old Muammar over there was when we were pulling him out of the back end of a sewer pipe, and that was the end of Gaddafi. So, is that true? One thing that I do know is true is that we told Saddam Hussein that he had to give up his weapons of mass destruction or we were going to come get him. And he said, you know, I gave him up. The UN said he doesn't have them. The United States said, yes, he does. And we went over there with a United States rope almost literally and put it around the neck of that guy and popped off his head like the top of a Pez stick. Now, that's a fact. And there were no weapons of mass destruction. So what she's saying here is very interesting to me. Let's get back to the event.
The stakes are high. The threat is serious, and it's real for every one of us. This is why I'm committed as your president and commander-in-chief to end regime change wars, to work to bring about an end to this new Cold War, and walk us back away from this abyss of nuclear catastrophe. This is the change that we need to make. And it requires strong and courageous leadership, unwilling to bend to the whims of the military-industrial complex, or the neocons and neolibs in Washington who decades have continued to push for and wage these wars. Now is the time for us, for we the people, to make sure that our voices are heard, to make sure that we choose the kind of leadership we want to shape our future, to make sure that we are choosing our own destiny, a destiny that provides us with freedom and peace and opportunity and prosperity for every single American. That is the cause that calls on every single one of us right now. That is the cause that I'm asking you to stand united in joining me in pursuing. The obstacles are great. These battles will be tough. But I know that when we stand united in this spirit of service above self, putting the well-being of people before power, people before politics, people before profits, when we stand united, there is no obstacle we cannot overcome. Never forget that the power lies within our hands to dictate a future that provides for each and every one of us, a future that will create that bright future for generations to come. I'm Tulsi Gabbard. I ask for your support in running for president so that I may serve you as
Okay, so the number one issue in the state of Iowa, at least according to the politicians and the pollsters, is health care. That's probably true across the better part of the United States also. And Representative Gabbard did touch on the health care issue. She started with the foreign affairs issue, and I get that because the point is, if you're dead, if you're a victim of nuclear annihilation, if you're a victim of regime change wars, it doesn't make any difference what kind of health care plan that you have. But healthcare is of real concern and was something that she talked about. Let's listen in.
There's legislation that I'm a co-sponsor of in the last Congress, H.R. 676, which is a single-payer Medicare for all bill. There will be a bill introduced soon in the House of Representatives that I look forward to co-sponsoring that provides for single-payer Medicare for all. And really what it comes down to, again, as I said, is making sure that everyone has that quality health care that we need. If there is a private insurance plan or something else that people want to purchase on their own, that's fine. It's a free country. But our responsibility is to make it so that every person, pre-existing health condition or not, is able to get that quality care that we need.
You know, the primary criticism of this Medicare for all concept, which is shared by a lot of the Democrats in the field, is that the country can't afford it, that we just can't tax people enough to pay for it. Her point would be, and it's well taken, that if you're not spending trillions of dollars on military intervention, on regime-changing wars, which do nothing but harm us and endanger us, and if you're not spending billions of dollars giving tax breaks and incentives to individuals and corporations domestically that don't want it, don't need it, we're probably going to be able to afford this. The economy will be able to pivot to provide health care for all. Well, next up, a couple of more questions were posed to the representative, and then the press gaggle, as I mentioned at the onset, an opportunity for the radio and television reporters to pose their questions specifically after her comments to the public. Well, your intrepid reporter, Podcast by George, was there. And the thing that I was most interested in asking her was, is she alone in these views, or relatively alone? If she's elected as President of the United States, if she has a split Congress, or maybe even a Democratic Congress, are there enough people that have given up on this age-old philosophy of military interventionism, of world policing, of regime change around the world, something that's been warned about for decades, going back all the way to Dwight Eisenhower? Is she going to be able to get to the support that she needs in the Congress to implement a really radical change? Here's the question.
Tulsi, the terminology that you use is very interesting to me, the regime wars that have plagued our country, and the fact this is a deep-seated belief in Washington and the media centers, and it's held by neocons and neo-libs, which a lot of people aren't aware of. If you're elected, are you going to be a voice in the wilderness? Are you a party of one? How do you collaborate, get other like-minded people to come and change a deep-seated belief like that?
There are like-minded members of Congress, and both Democrats and Republicans. The vast majority of the American people understand and support this change that I am calling for, and this change I am seeking to lead to end these regime change wars, because we know who pays the price. We know the cost that we are bearing in this country and why we must bring about that change. This is not an impossible task. It is a necessary one for us, for our security, and for our future.
All right, there you go. That's U.S. Representative Tulsi Gabbard appearing in the state of Iowa, running for president and running hard. She's working it. She's been out there for several months, and I just thought that was great stuff, and I wanted to share that with everybody on a podcast by George. One thing she did bring up, you may be aware of this, they've changed the debate rules. You have to have a certain number of financial contributors to be able to appear on the debate stage in the primaries that are coming up. So she's encouraging everybody to go to her website, and I'll put a link to that on podcastbygeorge.com and on the Facebook page so that you can go there. And if you just contribute $1, I mean, it's just you have to contribute something. She has to have a minimum number of people contributing in 20 states. There's a little math involved in it. I'm not real good at that. But anyway, that'll get her on that stage in those debates. And I think we want her there. And I'll be moving about. I'll be talking to some more of these folks and keeping tabs on these presidential candidates as we move closer to election 2020 and, of course, the all-important Iowa caucuses. Thanks again for listening in to another podcast by George.